Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Paul Sommerville, the CEO of Sommerville Advisory Markets. Paul, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, Max.
All right, Paul Sommerville, let's talk about hashtag Anglo-Tape, which has been sweeping Twitter. Now, first, we've got a major reveal coming because you've done some investigative work on this. But first, let's remind the audience of the story thus far.
Sure. Well, I'm supposed to start off with that the story about Anglo-Irish Bank is not a story about one rogue bank. It's basically the story of cronyism in Ireland. So what we need to say is that Anglo-Irish Bank lost a lot of money through the property crash. We all know that. So did many of the other banks. One thing that before we start would be that the Irish economy was very fragile, no matter about these losses in the banks. So they lost about 30 billion so far. Other banks lost another 34 billion, so the total around 64 billion for the Irish banks. You know, the Irish economy is a very small economy, so that is a huge number. It's 45% of GDP.
Right. When you mention crony capitalism, of course, what you're talking about is the collusion between bankers and regulators to inflate an enormous bubble.
Well, that's exactly it. So these tapes that have come out recently are actually helping the establishment, because what they're trying to say is there was a couple of rogue bankers.
Okay, the tapes, when did they come out?
Sorry, well, the tapes were tapes in 2008, 2009, but they've just been revealed by a major newspaper in Ireland in the last week or so.
Okay.
So these, you know, they have millions of tapes. We've only heard some hours of these tapes, but most of the tapes so far have been between 2008, 2009, and they are from the Treasury function in the Anglo-Irish Bank and what the traders were saying to the CEO and what the CEO was saying to them. It's quite important that the CEO's phone was not taped, but so you only hear the conversations when it's the dealing room or the Treasury department talking to him, or they're talking back and forth. But again, I'd like to stress that the Irish economy was fragile no matter what, and secondly, that Anglo-Irish Bank, yes, it did lose a humongous and it was a rogue bank, but the establishment wants us to think that it's just rogue bankers, when actually there's a lot more to it.
There's tremendous collusion between the banking sector and the government. That's why you have a collapse of the Irish economy, the collapse in the Greek economy, and the collapse in economies around the world, is that there's a neo-fascism in place, and we see it certainly in Ireland. It's one of the most corrupt governments in Europe historically than any other government, and that's also part of the mix here, is that the crony capitalism in Ireland is one of the most severe problems of any European country. But the tapes themselves, and you can hear the tapes, so you've got actual voices on these tapes, and they're threatening, essentially, give us the money, we're going in with arms swinging, they're threatening violence. It's a stick-up, isn't it? What's the difference between this and a hold-up?
Well, basically what they're doing is they're planning to go to the government and understate the amount of money they need to rope in the government, because they believe when the government hands over some money that they'll have what they say skin in the game, and the government will have to continue to give over money. So that's exactly. But unless you know the history of Anglo-Irish Bank, it goes back a little bit before then, because if you just listen to the tapes 2008, 2009, yeah, you could say, it's just a bunch of bankers, they're ripping off the government, and that's the end of the story. But it really isn't, because when you go back to how the bank worked, the bank really wasn't a bank. Even calling it a bank, it was really a toxic hedge fund, of a property hedge fund, really highly leveraged, and they were handing over money left, right and centre to a small group of property developers, maybe 25, 30 property developers. So not were they only concentrated in property, they were concentrated on these 25 or 30 individuals, and these guys were going out free will, buying up everything in sight.
Yeah, let me jump in here, because you say it's not really a bank. Well, it's not really a bank to the degree that it has retail customers.
Exactly.
It only has speculating property developing customers.
Yeah.
So again, why the government would bail out just developers is another question, because it was not essential to the day-to-day banking infrastructure of the Irish economy. It's just simply it's a sham company set up to foist sham loans to sham developers to create a sham economic with a bubble that was 100% guaranteed to burst.
Well, I would agree it was 100% going to burst. But, you know, it was run basically by a bunch of sort of spoofers, charlatans, who became bankers, and that was the main thrust of what they were trying to do. So that's quite important. Ireland is a very small country, so they had very well connected, you know, for an example, the CEO up to 2005 was very best friends with the Minister for Finance at that time, which is Charlie McCreevy, who brought in loads of incentives for the property market. So,
right, once again, this theme of crony capitalism and a corrupt government working hand in glove with shysters and what I call financial terrorists who are destroying. I mean, the problem is now you've got austerity, so people are suffering tremendously in Ireland as a result of this heist that took place by Anglo-Irish in cooperation with this corrupt government.
I mean, you've got nearly half a million people unemployed. You've got a lot of young people emigrating. You've got people committing suicide left, right and centre. You know, the hardship around Ireland is absolutely, horrendous. But yet, people in Ireland aren't really sure who to blame. So when these tapes come out, obviously their anger is focused totally on the bankers. Now, I'm not absolving these bankers, but what I'm trying to suggest is the regulatory system, the politicians were involved. The media colluded totally through this whole crisis. Property prices tripled in Ireland between 2000 and 2006. This liquidity flooded in from the German banks, was lent to these banks, and was flooded into our system. And that is basically what happened. But I think it's quite important, and when we get to the tapes, is to try and see who the main players were in this.
Now, let me jump in here for a second.
Sure.
It says the tapes prove that senior executives clearly understood that the true cost of the bailout would be unacceptable to the taxpayer, and so they lied. Presumably, it is against the law in Ireland to defraud the taxpayer. But will any criminal charges now follow? Paul Sommerville.
Well, you see, this is where the court cases maybe will come to. You say they lied, but actually these bankers are their defence is going to be that they, in collusion with the financial regulator, is what they did. So they are.
All right, so they're using the Hitler defence, because everything Hitler did was legal, including the pogroms and the incineration of millions. That was totally legal. So the total incineration of the Irish economy is totally legal. So the Irish people should say, hey, it's great. It's legal that I'm suffering austerity, that my baby can't survive, that I'm dying. It's great, because it's legal.
Well, maybe so, but don't forget, there was collusion within the regulator and this is yet to be proven, but between the politicians and the regulator is a very important thing. So I'll just go back to, say, 2005, because I think it's quite important. The CEO of Anglo-Irish Bank stepped down. He was very well connected politically and stepped down in 2005 and became the chairman. Now, so far, the bank was doing very well. Obviously, the property market was booming and things were fine. But he started borrowing money from the bank himself. And this is where, if this wasn't a regular bank collapse, he started borrowing. He borrowed about 130 million euros off the bank subsequently. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because when the Anglo-Irish Bank was coming to the stock exchange to say the results, whatever, they decided that they didn't want to show these loans as director loans. So what they did was, you would know this term bed and breakfast loans. So what they did was, the chairman's loans, what they did was they sent them out to another bank the day before the results and brought them back in the following day.
We call it peekaboo accounting.
Yes,
Lehman
exactly.
Brothers was guilty of this as well. They shift loans off and back and forth on balance sheets of banks. They collude, again, with cooperation of the government. Now, let's talk about Germany for a second, because, I mean, it's very amusing that the Irish people find themselves being, violated in a most egregious manner by banking charlatans, and they're suffering and dying. I mean, a lot of people would find that amusing. Apparently, the Irish, in fact, don't give a flying, about their own people enough to care about them. Okay, that's Ireland. But Germany, which is a sound country with a sound government and sound people running it, it's infecting their banking system. What right does Ireland have to infect Germany's banking system when you're dancing around and playing like you give a flying hoot about yourselves? I mean, if you don't want to save yourselves,
well, I don't.
Then if you're ready to committing suicide, why bring Germany into it? Germany's a fine country with fine people. Why are you bringing them into it?
Well, I don't agree with that at all. And one of the biggest banking collapses of all time was actually DEFA Bank, which was based in Ireland as a German bank. So I think you've got your facts
but
there.
it didn't suffer, and Germany didn't suffer as a result of it. The Irish people are there to be abused. That's their role in the Eurozone.
Well,
they're there to be abused.
Well,
they're slaves.
Yeah.
They started as slaves. They continue to be slaves. They're now debt slaves, and they're happy to be debt slaves.
Well, you've got a point. Our Irish people are very docile. They realise that someone has inserted something anally, in their anal.
All right, let me stop for a second, because we've got breaking news. All right, obviously I'm being a bit hard here in this interview, Paul Sommerville, because I think you and I are both shocked that this level of docility that permeates the country
Well, I'm not shocked at all. I'm not shocked at all, and that's the reason why I'm here. Because there are so many people in Ireland that need this corrupt system to keep going, that they are positions of power, and that's in the media and everywhere else. So I'm not surprised at all.
So it's a bit of a kleptocracy. Okay, we got just a few minutes left, so I want to talk now. You came here today, and you believe you have some information that would, the whistleblower who put these tapes out in the public domain, you think you've got some leads on that?
Well, yeah, I don't know definitively, but I can make a very educated guess that the biggest debtor of Anglo-Irish Bank is taking a court case against Anglo-Irish Bank at the moment and the government because they believe that they were given loans fraudulently. Now, this man is a man called Sean Quinn. He was in the Forbes 200 list of the most wealthy 200 people around the world in 2008. Now, he is bringing a case against the Irish government and Anglo to say that when they were lending him money, because basically what was happening was they were lending him money, he was trading derivatives in the shares of Anglo-Irish Bank, and he was propping up the shares for, it all went horribly wrong, obviously, and he lost 2.4 billion. But his argument, and again, I think he's got another strong case, is that Anglo was actually lending him money when they knew that the bank was bust. So it wasn't a liquidity problem, but they also believe, Sean Quinn also believes that the Anglo, in cahoots with the regulator and the Irish state, knew all this when they were lending him money. So his defence is going to be that they were lent the money fraudulently, and I think he's got a fair case.
Okay,
but,
so Sean Quinn,
I would just have to state, I'm not 100% that he leaked the tapes, but I would say that someone close to him and the associates of Sean Quinn are trying to get the Irish population on their side, so they have leaked the tapes into the domain. So anyone who believes...
He's a friend of the show. His people, I wouldn't say a friend of the show, but we are in contact. We met them at Kilconomics.
Sure, great, yeah.
Last year, we know people with Sean Quinn. He was going to be on our show. He's going to come and talk to our show. We know that there's a Anglo-Irish story there. His case is that Anglo lent him money to buy shares fraudulently because they knew at the time that they were already bust. And these tapes support that argument.
They definitely support that argument. The other thing about Sean Quinn is he's a self-made man. He left school when he was 14. He created a lot of jobs in the northern part of the southern part of Ireland. So, he's very well liked, and he had set up many businesses. Now, he had his problems. He set up an insurance company, and he used some of the money from an insurance company to bring in for his derivatives. So, he is in trouble over that, and he got kicked off the board for that. So, he's no white knight, but in all fairness, he would say himself that, he was a gambler. He did take a lot of risks in the derivatives market.
In Wall Street, we refer to him as he's the leper with the most fingers.
Well,
you have a leper colony of bankers. He's not doing anything different than J.P. Morgan does, or Goldman Sachs does, or HSBC or Barclays. They all commit similar frauds to allegedly what Sean Quinn is being committed, except he had the misfortune of being wrapped up and tied up in this Anglo-Irish case, which was a spectacular, very public blow-up, and so he got pulled in. All right, Paul Sommerville, we're out of time. We got to go, but thanks so much for coming to the studio today to be on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. It's a pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Paul Sommerville. If you'd like to get in touch, please tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.